Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whenever you are watching this. Welcome to Link Up Leaders, your direct link to leaders in supply chain and e-commerce. My name is Lisa Kinski. I'm your producer and co-host, and as always, joined by Francois Jeffrey. Francois, I sound better today, I guess?
You sound a lot better. You sound good enough to do the intro, thank God, because I forgot exactly what it was.
It's the same thing every time, man. Come on.
I know, and I should get it down. I will get it down.
Okay. Well, for today, we have our second Yanni of the week. It's also our second pod of the week. Well, actually, we have a Yanni. Yesterday, we had Yoni. Anyway, without further ado, Yanni Kosminski, how are you doing today, dear?
Hey, guys. Thanks for having me on. It's excited to be here.
Yes, we're very pleased to have you. So why don't you just tell us a little bit about your background? We'll just jump straight into everything. And you can tell us where your accent comes from and everything, because it's so beautiful. I'm loving it. It's going to be a great conversation.
Well, thanks for teeing me up there. Yeah, I mean, we went through it a little bit before with the accent. Hopefully people are understanding me. He's definitely Australian. And that's probably a good segue. That's where my life and therefore career started. So I was in creative advertising, digital marketing in Australia, working with always enterprise clients like MasterCard, and over there was Mondelez Craft Foods, which you guys might not know, but for those who don't live in the US, it's a pretty huge confectionery business. And I would say,
what was the name of it again?
So Mondelez. So they've got Cadbury Dairy Milk, Boost, Freddo Frog, Cream Eggs, you guys might know.
Yeah.
But anyway, there you go.
Yeah.
So working with always enterprise clients in smaller businesses. So I sort of came into the space inside of digital where social media was just becoming a thing. So I was part of the team that launched Mercedes-Benz Australia and New Zealand's Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, Pinterest, sort of back in, that would have been about 2010. And so, very, very different world. I was the largest media buyer in Australia for a period of time inside of Facebook. It was a whopping $30,000 a month. Can you believe it? But back then that was enormous, right?
Yeah.
I used to have an amazing experience every year when the Grand Prix would roll around, and you'd have Mercedes. Obviously you go with your client Mercedes to the Grand Prix, but then Facebook had their own spot, so they'd fight over where you got to go. So it was a pretty sweet gig. And then I found my way over to the States, where I worked at a creative agency over there called Something Massive. And it was specialized in sort of the digital strategy and social space. So I used to work with Sony over there and MasterCard. I worked on the Priceless.com website and everything from content production to digital strategy to even live activations and TV commercials. That was sort of, for the first decade of my career, that was the focus. And I always had a passion inside of e-commerce. So I moved to Israel 4 years ago. So I've been in Tel Aviv now 4 years and met a couple of guys and found my way very heavily into Amazon, specifically inside of e-commerce, where I took an Amazon store from 2 million to 5 million in 12 months. And
Wow.
the way so I mean, for those who know, it's impressive, but I think it's achievable for everyone. And it's just the way in which you sort of look at the equation. And so, how we even approached that and what was sort of the catalyst into getting into the businesses that we're delivering on today was because we effectively built out an agency in the Philippines with high-level talent from designers and copywriters to ops managers, inventory and logistics specialists. We built a very high-level team. Obviously, it was a lot more affordable than staffing them in the US or Australia or Israel or most countries, at least that I've lived in and worked with. And that sort of led us into where we sit today. So I don't know if you want me to go through what life looks like today for me right now, or
Well, let's back up a little bit. That transition, how hard was that transition? I know before this you were saying that you really had a passion for e-commerce when you were in LA, and you kind of had to choose a direction, either stay with more of this corporate direction or go into the e-commerce direction. One, what really appealed to you most in e-commerce, and two, how was that transition?
Yeah, great question. So to give you a little bit more context, so I've been building e-commerce websites as part of, all the way back in Australia. So I was working in the e-commerce space, but I was always working with clients. And I'll tell you that the true catalyst was that, I started my own agency and it was doing great, but it wasn't very fulfilling. So I went the solopreneur route, and I realized that's just not me. I love to have great minds around me. I like to sort of be pushed, and I'm never going to be the best at everything. So finding complementary partners or different players became sort of a focus for me. So the transition really happened when, I used to spend $100,000 a year for an agency, like as in my own agency for a client, and yield 1.4 million in return on ad spend. And, I do UX UI work for a website, and it would increase the conversions for another client, and I'd work on content strategy for another. And, to put it bluntly, I was sick of making idiots rich. So I said, you know what, I could probably have a lot more impact if I got to see the entire marketing mix. And so that's where I found my partners in the Amazon business that I was a part of. That was acquired by Thrasio last year. I wasn't part of the transition and the exit. That's a story for another time. Maybe if I come on again and you're talking about deep, dark secrets, no. But
we'll have you back on for some secrets.
yeah. So effectively, it was the ability to be closer to working with my own products, the product development team, having effectively an infrastructure that enables the supply chain and the logistics, the production side, and I could focus on the areas where I was strongest. And that was sort of the transition, was that I wanted to be more invested and more involved. And, if you look at sort of the landscape, I was in agency land my whole life, and this was me moving to client side.
It's interesting. I've never heard someone that was more adamant or more specialized in marketing actually bring up that supply chain was one of the backbones, or that it's even brought up in conversation. No one likes to talk about supply chain. I always say it is the unsexy side. Yeah, except for me. It is sort of the unsexy side of e-commerce, but it is the backbone, right? With no solid supply chain, there is no advertising. There are no products to actually push.
I mean, when you talk about an e-commerce business, when you talk about any business that's selling product, if you don't have your shit together, and it starts at, what does my product sets look like? What SKUs am I bringing to market? How am I actually making sure? You could have the best marketing in the world when you talk about a product-based business, but if you can't manage your inventory levels and what's going on, then what are you selling? So yeah, I couldn't agree more.
Mm-hmm.
And so what does that look like in regards to, because I've always been curious about this, what does it look like where the supply chain team works with the marketing team? Like, what does the marketing team need from the supply chain team in order to be effective in their marketing?
Yeah, I mean, it's a complex question, because when you talk about the integration, so we gave the example of a presentation we did recently on, what's some of the more complex processes to set up inside of a business. And definitely when you talk about, let's look at Amazon specifically, when you talk about bringing a product to market and you're starting to do your listing creation, that's where effectively all the departments meet. You need to understand what inventory levels you can have. So that's going to touch on your media spend and your ad creative, and that's going to touch on your listings and how you're going to promote the product. So effectively, it's the conversation of what do we think is realistic based on, let's assume that you've got a research team. I mean, it depends on how big your business is. Let's say you're doing the research on a Helium 10 or a Jungle Scout, and you're trying to assess sort of what is the opportunity that exists in market, and what is my first product run going to look like? Or if you're a bigger business, I'm going to acquire this business, and therefore, what's the capacity planning look like? And that will obviously dictate it, sort of that push-pull of, I want to make sure that I'm always in stock, and we all know how much Amazon punishes you for not, enabling that. So yeah, you don't want to be out of stock. You want to save that BSR ranking and hold on to it for dear life. But it is the moment in time where you need to understand what. Also, we'd be looking at things like, what is the lead time in terms of production? So understanding at what point, from a marketing perspective, am I going to need to consider reordering? It's also, I would say, equally bad having to then, there's nothing worse putting my marketing hat on than saying, right, we've absolutely crushed this campaign, whether it's, off Amazon, on Amazon, whether it's directing website traffic, affiliates, partnerships, whatever that is, to have to pull back even on thing as simple as media spend. It's pretty devastating when you've done everything right. So again, you want to link up supply chain into the equation. It's fundamental.
Yeah, and that's actually one of the core concepts as to why we put this podcast together, and that's why we say it's, the link up between supply chain and e-commerce, because we do believe exactly what you're saying. It is one of the same. One can't be something without the other, and they have to support each other, at all times. But I did kind of take us down a rabbit hole. Tell us about what life is like today. You are in Tel Aviv.
Other than working from home.
Yeah.
I can keep going down this rabbit hole. I would say, just to finish off on your point, you can't look at any aspect of your business in isolation. So, every single aspect of it, whether it's supply chain and logistics, marketing, media spend, and everything in between, everything has to be well oiled in order for you to succeed. And if you have a weak link, and, I would say, honestly, one of the areas that are going to be most punished is if you don't have your supply chain in order, because unlike media spend or ad creative, you can turn that on a dime if you have to, right? You could take a day, half a day, a couple of days, and you could get it done. Even if you're bad at maybe 3 days, let's say, you don't have the same luxuries when you're talking about supply chain and logistics and that level of planning. You have to be very, very well oiled and systematic and understand the numbers. So yeah, just to echo your points, I think it is an absolute fundamental. And, when we put together, we've actually got something that I'll share with you guys in a 2-year financial forecasting that incorporates things like inventory planning and, projected refunds and reimbursements and things like that. But it's key. It's a key pillar. So yeah, I'm totally on that wavelength. And I guess sexier topics, or maybe not sexier topic, because I find all that stuff super interesting. Given that one of the businesses, and my life today, one of the businesses is a consulting practice that is called Escala. And what we do inside of there is we effectively assess how systemized an e-commerce business is based on people, process, and technology. And so today we've got a team of about 20. I think by the end of the month we'll be at about 25 in the consulting business, all ex-Accenture and Ernst & Young consultants out of the Philippines, where we'll deploy a team of 2 and we'll effectively build out things like process maps and standard operating procedures, training videos and documentation, building effectively a more well-oiled system, process, and company structure, enabling scale versus just growth, where you throw typically people at the problem. It doesn't matter if they're out of the US or the Philippines or Bangladesh or wherever your team members come from. It's never the solution. It doesn't matter how cheap you can find someone. You always get what you pay for, but it's about really thinking through, how do we make this efficient, and how do we have the most important people working on the most important tasks. So that's Escala. That's our consulting practice. And the other business, which is separate but in ways complementary, is an end-to-end executive search and HR function into the Philippines. So what we did is we effectively recreated what we created inside of that Amazon business for e-commerce sellers. And there are businesses that exist like Multiply Me in market, but I would say that the key point of difference is that we're not really working with people who are just starting on Amazon. The term VA is effectively a banned term in our office, because we're not placing virtual assistants. The term for me is kind of like bastardizing someone's career. Like you're giving someone low-level tasks, and they can never specialize and become an expert in any one product or one solution or one service or one area. So for us, we're hiring inventory managers and supply chain and logistics, operations managers, creative directors, designers, specialized Google AdWords PPC specialists. We're finding talent sort of at that level, and a great resource, I would say, if you're starting out, if Multiply Me wasn't sort of where you were at, things like onlinejobs.ph, I like to call it like the gateway drug to the Philippines. Like, you find talent that's sort of just good enough to tick a few boxes and can sort of help you understand like what's possible. But I guess the other thing that makes us unique is that it's not just about finding talent. So we have a team of recruiters, and we have our own networks and strategic partnerships into the Philippines. But we handle everything from helping create the job description to having one of the recruiters sit on the call to enabling and building out a scorecard to help people better interview. Obviously, no one who's using us is a recruiter. So we want to leverage the talent that we have to educate people throughout the process. And then it moves into account management and onboarding. So you'll get a dedicated HR professional that will effectively work to build with you the KPIs and the expectations, the onboarding plan, the key personnel. We handle performance management, payroll, healthcare, social security, HMO, PhilHealth, 13th month. I mean, our focus is on how do we actually enable better working relationships with, at the moment, the focus is the Philippines, but with remote teams. So we even have a piece of software that we've built to enable that on the back end from a workflow perspective. And so that's what we're doing today. And just to give you sort of the round off, we're relatively new in the space. So probably been around for 18 months, but we were a team of 4 in January last year. And at this moment, I think we're at about 140 full-time on payroll.
Wow.
Yeah, insane growth. I remember seeing in the notes that you sent over, and I was very impressed.
Well, I mean, on one hand, you always want to be pushing further, and a big passion for us is creating jobs. But I'd also say that if we weren't growing that quickly and doing it, more or less effectively, everyone has their problems, like any business going through growing pains. Doesn't matter how slow or rapidly you're growing, but because we are a business but based on process improvement, then obviously, we have our next 2 years worth of hiring planning scheduled. We know who's coming in Q3 of this year and what the what the evolution looks like. And I mean, I could show you guys, I don't know if we're going to do a screen share, but I could show you guys our org chart just to sort of give you insights into sort of the complexities of how we're approaching scaling businesses.
Yeah, why not? We'll try to describe it as best as possible for the audio only, for everyone else that's listening out there. But yeah, let's take a look. I think you can screen share on this.
Yep, absolutely.
Well, I threw a spanner in the works. I actually let me pull something up to show you.
That's so guys. Funny.
Yeah, a monkey wrench.
Yes, I know, and I know that from a YouTube video. I'm a fan of the Try Guys. If anybody else is out there, let me know. But they went to Australia and they were doing the seafood video. They're like, it's a spanner crab because their claws look like spanners. And everybody's like, what are you talking about? He's like, oh, I think you call it a wrench. And we're like, yeah, that makes more sense.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay. I had no idea what you were talking about.
So I don't remember the name. I want to say, I can't remember the name of the band, but we used to laugh about it a lot because there's a line that says, I don't want to be your monkey wrench.
Yes. Crap. I'll find it.
So we used to laugh and we said, well, if this was in Australia, it would be, I don't want to be your adjustable spanner. It doesn't have the same, it's not as spicy.
Doesn't
have
the
same ring to it. Yeah.
No, and it's a Foo Fighters song called Monkey Wrench.
There you go, Foo Fighters.
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to share my screen here, and I'm going to pull something up just because you shouldn't really commit to these things without having it ready. So
yeah,
what I'm just going to show you guys is like when I talk about the level of planning, the way we approach it in Escala for our business is we build out the high-level process, and in that also is each of the different respective roles and what they're delivering on. But this is an outdated org chart from the business. It was the first one I could pull up. So you can see here, we're literally planning through, until 2022, the different roles that we're going to be hiring and sort of the expense. I mean, it is quite dated. We don't have Wildfire Creative anymore as part of it, but this is the level of planning that we're going into where everyone has their accountability and responsibility, and we're effectively looking to drive through in those insights. When you talk about business planning, when you talk about inventory and supply chain, these are fundamental building blocks for business, right? Oh, that's trippy.
We got some inception going on. And was that, and I'm assuming that is only based on you having the knowledge and experience of what SOPs need to be done. right? And what positions actually need to be made. I think what a lot of sellers tend to do, particularly as they're scaling up, is they don't have that. They think, okay, I believe it was Gilad that was talking about, they have this Superman complex where they think, oh, I'm already in Facebook, so I'm going to make some Facebook ads. I'm already in Amazon, so I'm going to improve my listing. I'm going to check my inventory. So it's hard to diversify that. How does a seller sort of start to scale up and think about these future operations to the level that you do?
Yeah, well, I would say that a key to our success has been inherent in the planning. We put things in the sandbox, we stress test them before we launch and deploy. So the real thing is, we've already gone through the training drills. So, I would say, and the thing that I like to recommend to people is, if they're not exactly sure for a lot of people, they don't really understand that they're working, we were talking before about in your business versus on it. So from a starting point, and with everything in life, it's about awareness. It's about self-awareness. So for a lot of sellers and a lot of people running businesses in general, you're sort of running, flying, holding on to the seat of your pants, effectively trying to go through this process. And the thing that I think is a really great fundamental building block is to go through it and start defining inside of your day, what are the tasks, what are the critical tasks that you're actually delivering. So if you looked at breaking down your entire business, or rather your entire day and what's happening across the week, look at every single task and rank them from a 1 to 5. 5 being tasks that are critical, that you yourself need to do, and ones that really don't need to be you. They're not critical. Anyone could do them. And so a first step is understanding, well, what's happening? What's happening, again, if you're a smaller seller, what am I doing and how am I spending my time? And if you're a larger business and you have already teams in place, is documenting out the process, actually putting together the step-by-step play of what is happening in your business. For a lot of businesses, a lot of sellers, the response you often get is that, I know everything that's going on, I've got a handle on it, it's all up here. I'm pointing to my head for those not watching. So it's all in their head. So the reality is, you've got to start to document and define what's happening in your business. And I'll say on that point, the mistake that a lot of people make when looking to build out SOPs is they take a bottom-up approach, is how we define it, versus a top-down. So a bottom-up, for example, would be if you're doing keyword research for a new product that you want to launch, for example, it might be jump into Helium 10, go take a look at the number of reviews, nothing more than 500 reviews, and has to be live for X period. You define each of the steps internally, but what you're failing to see is, how does that fit into the core function of the business? What are the processes at a high level? How does that Helium 10 research piece fit into new product development and ordering of new stock and actually an inventory run? So define your business as a whole, and I could pull up some examples of what that looks like too, and sort of walk you through what the way you can sort of approach it and how you can start to do this for yourself at home.
Well, let's try to keep it to if it's possible, to let's talk through that approach and how they would go through it, or if it is a lot, which I assume we
can talk through it. We can talk through it.
Okay.
Yeah, of course. I do this all day.
Perfect. Yeah, no, I mean, it's an interesting perspective to, first of all, lay out exactly how you laid out, because when I speak to a lot of sellers, particularly smaller sellers, they are just thinking about that one thing that they have to do. I do have to go into Helium 10 and I have to do that product research, but what they don't think about is, well, hey, for example, what type of packaging is associated with that? What size is that? What Amazon FBA fees are going to be associated with that? What's the lead time from the supplier? What's the pricing there? How is the market impacting that? For example, the Suez Canal is increasing shipping logistics costs across the board globally. Raw materials pricing are skyrocketing across the board globally. It's a lot to think about. So I would love to see sort of this top-down approach.
Yeah. So if we're talking about the top-down approach, I think to take it to one step behind, or one step before this, is that for most people, let's talk about smaller sellers for a second. For most people, the common growth trajectory really looks like, you have an early concept. Let's say you've got a new product that you want to bring to market. It's your first product inside of Amazon. You bring it to market, you build the framework, you have an understanding, right? I have my suppliers, I can get it to Amazon, it's fulfilled by Amazon, I'm starting to do my media buying, I have my proof of concept, I've got my first sales, and then what typically ends up happening is you get stuck in that urgent task, and then another urgent task, and then another urgent task. And that's a very common growth trajectory. And I think that's sort of for lack of a better term, that's the rat race that people are trying to get out of. You didn't create a business so that you would work 70 hours a week. That, you didn't come in with the idea of becoming a slave to your business. So, a more healthy growth trajectory is once you have that proof of concept and you've built the framework and you understand, that's the time when you start to prepare for scale. And that's when you start to build out those business systems. Because at the start, it's always going to be driven by humans, right? We've got to figure it out. We've got to understand. We've got to assess what's happening. But at some point in time, once you've got that proof of concept, that's when you look to start systemizing your business. And so when we talk about that top-down approach, and I'm going to be a little sneaky here and pull something up so that I can take a look at it. But when we're talking about that top-down approach, we, in our methodology inside of Escala, we look at it as sort of 5 phases to how you build out or how we build out SOPs. And so as a top-down approach, you always have to understand what your core processes are. So that's the framework that really is the primary drivers of the value and satisfaction and the profits inside of your business. So, that's the departments. That's going to be, for example, your research and development, your brand management, your supply chain and logistics, and your customer service. Those might be 4 of your core processes. And then each of those would fit inside of the next layer down is new process groups. So that might be the actual new product discovery. So if we looked at the product and research or product and development function, inside of that, a process group would be the new product development. And then inside of that, we would then build out the sub-processes. So the sub-processes are effectively the process maps of like what's happening in the business. So if you're following along, and it is a little bit complex, you're first looking at, okay, this is my core functions as a business. This is what happens inside of every core function. And then once you get to that next layer down, that's when you start to build in. Now I have this team member who is delivering on keyword research, but effectively my marketing manager is going to define the budget. So I need to build the report. So the PPC specialist or the product researcher is going through the stages and you're building out that process. Who's accountable, who's responsible for what? And then at the next stage down, which would be sort of the next layer down is 4, would be at the activities. So this is the detailed step-by-step process as to what's happening inside of your business. And that's sort of the most detailed aspect of it is literally the way we approach it is every single activity and working instruction, which is the 5th layer, will have who a step was performed by, what it was, who would be the accountability if that person wasn't in play for that day or they left, and what are each of the different phases or steps inside of it, and then videos that are no more than sort of 2 to 5 minutes on each. Because, the reality is you're going to want to be able to understand how to run any aspect inside of your business within a pretty quick time frame. And so taking that bottom-up approach, typically speaking, what you'll find is the person who created that SOP knows where to find that SOP, but they're the last person who needs to know about it. They've built it. So this enables you to really get a clear understanding of what's happening in the business and what's going on. And I think a really simple way to connect the dots here, or to give you sort of a working example that's a little bit more simplistic. I've never had to explain that without any sort of visual aids to share. So think about it this way. I come from agency land, and we had many, many clients. So that might be like having many, many different product SKUs. Now, when you're setting up your folder structure in Dropbox or Google Drive, the idea is not to have every individual save it wherever they want and jump back into it. You build a folder structure. You build a structure so that I know that these are the creative assets. This is the inventory planning. This is going to be the design. This is where the copy sits. This is where, all the other suppliers sit. This is where the invoices sit. So you build the different folder structures and you build uniformity across it so that anyone who's moved across a different product SKU, or as it grows, or let's say it's an agency and it's a new account, if we're an Amazon brand management agency, you want everyone in the business to be able to pick up right where it was left off. And so, I think that's probably the most simple way to sort of frame it in your mind.
Yeah, I mean, it's essentially a hierarchy, right? It's a hierarchy, and when you were describing it, what I took away from it was, you have sort of that top level that really, they have the vision. They know exactly, they have a clear vision of exactly what they want the business. Let's say they want the business to grow from 2 to 5 million, right, in the next 18 months. And then you have sort of the strategizers, the ones that strategize how they're going to get that, the ones that plan out how those strategies are going to be executed, and then those that manage the ones that are going to execute that. Is that a fair way to structure that hierarchy?
So, I mean, when you're building out the process itself, you need to look at it holistically, and you need to have, so like when we're going through it, we're effectively interviewing multiple key personnel inside of the business, because how you're going to see it, how I'm going to see it, and how Lisa's going to see it, maybe 3 different things. They might be very small differentials, but the truth is somewhere in the middle as to how, even if we looked at this podcast and how it's produced, you're going to have a view. I'm sure maybe Lisa's got a few areas that she's doing on the sides that she might not have mentioned to you because it's not so relevant. You don't need to know about that. But if Lisa couldn't be bothered, doing the production work anymore, then, where do we go? So I don't know if that's answering your question.
It is. No, it makes sense. You don't have to basically be a part of every single thing. You just have to know about that thing. Is that?
Yeah. So I'm not in the business. Let's say I'm not part of finance. We've got a financial controller. I don't even have logins to our Xero, to be honest with you. That's not my focus. My focus, I mean, they've built dashboards. We have management dashboards that help us understand the performance of the business at, a multitude of levels. And it's their responsibility and accountability to have us as senior management informed in the business and what's going on. So I won't know all those SOPs and processes, but if I had to, I could dive in and I could look in to see, what's going on here. So, depending on obviously how open you are as a company too, for us, we love to help everyone learn about every aspect of the business. So it's generally pretty open, and people can go, and we have cross-functional teams and education sessions on what's actually happening in other areas of the business. But, depending on how much visibility you want to give to people, I mean, I think it's great, having a glossary of terms around specific vernacular that's used inside of, let's say, finance is going to be very, very different to supply chain. So getting those insights, it helps you sort of better communicate. For example, with our recruitment team, they sit with the Escala team and they understand better, what are the key roles inside of Amazon businesses, built at scale. What are the things that are really moving the needle? Things like project managers that are so often overlooked. And, I feel like if there's any project managers out there listening, you guys don't get enough credit to the value and importance that you bring to an operation. Even, ops managers, nothing is possible without the team members we have in place who can handle all of the very heavy moving pieces at this stage. So shout out to all you ops COOs and project managers of the world. Got a lot of love for you.
I had a question that's time. Oh, so you have these SOPs built, and you have this structural hierarchy, essentially this functional org chart, right? Do you ever go through it, and maybe not you personally, but as a executive level team or a higher upper management team, do you ever go through it and start to audit it and start to say, well, hey, COVID impacted us, and now these SOPs just don't work. We have to improve them. Is that something that you also do at Escala?
So, short answer, yes.
Okay.
We do it internally as well. We run on EOS. If you guys are familiar with the entrepreneurial operating system, Traction, amazing book. I can't recommend it enough. A guy by the name of Gino Wickman wrote it a fair few years ago, and he's an incredible entrepreneur, and he's built a framework on how to run business, and it's very sort of base level. Like a lot of our methodology was originally, I would say, gleaned from EY and sort of recreated to be more appropriate for the businesses that we serve in the e-commerce space that aren't, Fortune 500s and have
Right.
10,000 employees. There's a lot of things that are redundant, but this really helps you stay on track. So there's something, for example, called your ROCs, which is effectively your quarterly goals that are outside of things like financial targets and, let's say Multiply Meets number of roles created, as a target goal. These are things that every individual in the business will have. So if you're senior management, you might have 5 to 7 through that quarter. If you're sort of more junior, it might be up to about 3, maybe 4 if you're really stretching. And so the idea is that, we build the highest strategy. We did a strategy session in December. We built the goals for the business at a high level from senior management, and then each of the departmental teams built their ROCs to ladder up to those higher up goals. So part of that is assessing and effectively auditing all the processes that exist in market today for us internally. And we have another department it's just been launched now internally, called the Kaizen, or Kaizen rather, department, which is Japanese for constant improvement. So we have a whole division on data and insights around our business so that we understand how do we break things down to the smallest possible outcome, because typically speaking, when you talk about team members, they're not at fault. And I hate when people sort of play the blame game and don't take accountability. It's going to be, for the most part, the system that is broken and not the individual. So being able to effectively manage and review and audit those processes is paramount for the success. And, having that constant check-in. We have what's called an L10 meeting every Wednesday for us. It's a 90-minute meeting where you go through and identify, discuss, and solve effectively any issue that's happening in the business in that week. And so you never sort of get stuck into having to do these huge revamps. Inside of Escala as a solution, yes, we come back and we do what's called a stabilization, where we'll check in 3 or 6 months later and we'll make sure that things are on track. And we're building, we're evolving. Like I said, we haven't been around for that long yet. So it's constant evolution. We were a very small team 12 months ago. By the end of the year, Escala will probably be at about 50 full-time consultants. So lots more to come.
I mean, it sounds like you've been around for a decade.
Yeah, for real.
Well, I would say that one of the big fundamental differences in terms of the DNA of our business is that we came, also my COO, Joan, who's an absolute superstar, she used to wrap companies up for sale. Lippy, my co-founder, he spent, I think, close to 5 years in the military as a commander in an elite combat unit. He had 100 soldiers under him. So us as a DNA, we've come from either high stress, agency land, Joan as well, with a lot of experience inside of digital and e-commerce, and we've effectively found Amazon. And it's like anything, it's tough. Business is tough, but it's not as complex as some of the more complex things that we've seen. So stepping into it and building these solutions are, it's just a different experience. It's not, we were sellers and we sort of figured it out, and now we're selling what we can do. We're sort of stepping into professionalizing the e-commerce and Amazon space is sort of, our objective is how do we take what enterprise businesses do, water it down to a level that makes sense and doesn't create these long-winded bureaucratic processes where, to ask for a day of leave, you need to speak to your boss's cousin's sister and put this form in. And if it wasn't form 4.3, then, that stuff is just way overkill. But if you can build things that create efficiencies and enable scale, then that's really, our whole position. So we are effectively using ourselves constantly as a guinea pig. The analytics dashboards that we build for ourselves internally and all the work that we're doing internally, the end goal and outcome is how do we now enable other businesses to operate like we do? And so that's a big part of our sort of our process, or our goal is to anything that we can create that helps us, we want to be able to give it out. And I'll share with you guys a link. It's literally fresh off the presses. We just built effectively a tool that we'd used previously when building out Amazon businesses, and it's a 2-year cash flow projection, like I was mentioning before. But it's a Google Doc that it's a really impressive Google Doc, and for a lot of people who aren't at that level to build integrated systems and haven't gotten ERP and CRM and are using, high level project management tools, it's a really good baseline to start to get a projections and understandings around everything from demand planning and inventory all the way through to cash flow and landed cost calculator. All that stuff is sort of baked into it.
And you would be okay with us linking that in the description of this video?
Yeah, absolutely. We've got like a sign up link. So I'll send it over to you guys. I hope it's live. So team, don't fail me now.
Is that a free tool?
Yeah, it's a free tool. I mean, I can actually pull up, but it's not going to help anyone who's listening, but I could pull up a few little links.
Send us that link. That link. Or Lisa, can you maybe toss that link up on the screen?
I can, but I'll definitely link it in the description of the video. And I'll also link the book that Yanni had said earlier, Traction, Get a Grip on Your Business by Gino Wickman. I'll be linking that in the description of the video and of the audio as well, so anybody can go get that. And we'll probably add that to book club.
I've got so many more books to recommend for your book club. If you're looking,
send them over. We haven't even started it yet, but we're thinking about starting. Lisa has a whole stack of really good books that we're going to get through. So no, that's exciting. But in regards to starting all of the planning, when would you say let me back up. Is this an Amazon only business, Escala, or is that a general e-commerce business or agency?
General e-commerce. So we're supporting agencies. So we're working with agencies. We're working with aggregators. We're working with Amazon sellers, direct sellers. So that's resellers. That's private label. Those that are doing arbitrage, we're working with as well. So, which is more or less resellers. So that's effectively the space. We initially, truth be told, our first project ever was with a company in Australia, and they were a company that used these cameras that they would put down drain pipes and effectively see if there were cracks in the pipes for insurance businesses. Anyway, long story short, we realized after we did a few projects that there's not going to be traction inside of this, and it's not our wheelhouse. We've never worked in a drain-based business before. We have hands-on experience inside of e-commerce for many years between sort of the founders, and you've got to build something when you talk about a service-based business that is repeatable. If you're trying to reinvent the wheel every single time, then there is no. You either have to charge a shit ton of money, and that's not the audience we're trying to play to. We want to enable businesses, not. We're not trying to be the next McKinsey or EY or Accenture sort of playing at that level. We want to empower small to medium enterprises that effectively need these solutions but don't have the cash to pay for them.
And is there sort of a playbook or resource or anything out there that a seller can effectively look at and say, hey, I'm growing at this scale and I have this many SKUs? Or is there a calculator? I don't even know how I would envision it, but I would envision like a calculator saying, hey, I have this many SKUs and I'm spending this much on advertising and I have this many suppliers, and it spits out, hey, I recommend that you have, I guess that's what your agency would do, but it would spit out and say, hey, I recommend that you have an inventory planner because you're not effectively managing your inventory, or, an advertising strategist, or whatever the case may be. Are there any resources out there that sort of guide them before they even get to that point?
Yeah, that's a great question. To answer you, nothing exists right now. I'd say the thing that I want to share with you guys is probably the first of a long series of tools that we're now going to start building to give away for free to enable people. So things like understanding, for example, the different types of ways that you can build your org chart when it comes to structuring your e-commerce business. We're going to share insights around that. Things like I was talking to you about the L10 meeting that we run. EOS worldwide, they have a bunch of these tools that sort of just PDF printouts. So we're just going to create a ton of these as Google Docs and slides that are editable, so that people can just freely use them. We're going to start effectively delivering one of these things hopefully a week, and our objective is always, how do we help first? So I would say that, I wish, and we are moving into the technology space, but it's a little bit more complex than just sort of putting in this number of SKUs would yield this return, because every every business is different, and things have to work for the way in which you're designed as a business. Also, you have to sort of understand what's the DNA of the company. And so typically speaking, when we deliver our engagements, we have what's called the steering committee midway through the project, where we make sure that we're still aligned on what the end outcome and delivery is going to look like. So we might give 3 or 4 options as to these are the different ways in which you can build out your org strategy and structure, but these are the pros and cons. And, if you're looking to be a volume-based business, maybe looking to centralize the creative output makes sense. But if you are looking to have many SKUs with specialized brands, maybe for that same team, you have specialized brand owners that only focus on a single. So, just a very light example. It gets a whole lot more complex, when you start to break off supply chain and inventory management, and you have sort of the different layers of, who you're actually leveraging and what their accountability and responsibilities inside of the business and how they interact with different departments. Like in our org charts, for example, we have like direct lines, which are effectively reporting lines, like this person manages this team or this individual. And then there's the dotted lines, for example, where you might have in the Kaizen team, there'd be dotted lines everywhere, because that is a resource. There's only one manager. The COO manages the manager of that team, but everyone becomes a resource. Like, me in marketing, for example, I want to build an analytics dashboard, but I have to give the insights. What am I looking to actually achieve and uncover and understand? So, there's all these different links of communication, and this is just scratching the surface. I never thought how hard it would be to go through the complexities of this, on the fly without any sort of screens to show you guys, because it sounds a lot more complex than it is. But really, the challenge is having the expertise to do it and putting in the sometimes hundreds and hundreds of hours of work that are needed to actually define, analyze, build, and then document out all these processes.
And then what would we only have a few minutes left really, but, as Francois said before, like sometimes your processes change and things need to shift and move around. What do you do, or like, what do you recommend, or how do you help as far as making sure you have the right people in those roles as things shift and as folks grow?
Yeah. Well, I'm gonna lean on traction again, and just say, because these are a lot of free tools that exist in market today. So the objective here is, how do we help people today? And I would say that one of the things that you build is, we built our core values. So us as a business, we know what we stand for. We invested a lot of time in understanding and getting collective buy-in from what do we stand for and what are we looking to achieve in the business. And then on the back of that, we build what's called a people analyzer. And the people analyzer looks at if people are a right cultural fit. So, 3 topics that they talk about there is GWC, gets it, wants it, and is capable. So we've had a number of instances, for example, where we've got the right person who wants it, they get it. So it's like a plus minus, you mark it as plus or minus or plus minus. They get it, they want it, or they really want it, they kind of get it, but they're not really capable. So then what we're looking for is, if they're a right cultural fit, they hit on, each of our 5 pillars, then we're going to find a place where they are in their unique, Goldilocks zone, so to speak, where they're really going to be talented and have output. And, to leverage back what I was talking about before, that whole Kaizen team, Jab, who's an absolute star, and I hope you listen to this, buddy. You're getting a lot of praise this week. He was originally going to be in the consulting team, and they weren't exactly sure, so we created our data and analytics single team member 9 months ago, and today he's building out a team of 5. It was his idea to sort of come with us with that idea. And so, having the right people, reviewing the processes, and understanding that, it's always about the people first. The skill sets, the actual work and the output. I want to get the best people on the bus, to steal a phrase from Good to Great. You want to get the right people on the bus first, and then you can figure out where it's going.
I like that.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like a lot of I listen to a lot of startup podcasts. I listen to Gray Matter, for example, and a lot of what they talk about is this distinction between generalist and specialist, right? It sounds like everything that you described is more of, he was a great generalist. He just he wasn't capable of, let's say, necessarily creating the creative. He knows exactly, everything that should be created. They're very good at visualizing it and knowing the direction it goes in, but they just can't create that creative. So they find a specialist that would create that creative. And that would be the difference between sort of that generalist and specialist. Is that sort of a fair comparison to what you were talking about also?
Yeah. And I would even echo that and say that, hire people that are smarter than you. Look for the individuals who bring something that you don't have to the table and have them teach you and not the other way around. Like, the consulting team that we have, a bunch of industrial engineers, CPAs, and God knows what else, they're way smarter than I am. I couldn't do what they're doing. But when you bring all the moving pieces together and you have specialists who are professionals in their field, then, that's where real magic starts to happen.
That's why we brought Lisa.
I heard a quote one time. I don't remember who said it, but it was, if you're the smartest person in the room, then you're in the wrong room. So,
yeah. 100%.
That applies. Well, awesome, Yanni. Thank you so much. I was going to say we've got a few minutes left. If you wanted to give us, we've kind of been talking about it the whole time, but a quick opportunity to plug Escala and Multiply Me, and then where folks can get a hold of you if they have any questions.
Yeah, for sure. So you can take a look at either one of our websites. So it's We Are Escala, ESCALA.com. Perfect. Look at that. All over it. So you can go there, or you can check out multiplyme.com, which is spelled multiply and then M. Oh my God. What can't you do? This is unbelievable. For those listening in, I always struggle to spell out loud. So I'm just going to read it because Lisa is absolutely all over this. multiplyme.com. And you'll be able to get a booking link in with either one of our teams. But, we can direct you to either.
Perfect. And then if folks have questions for you specifically, just go through that form and they can get a hold of you or LinkedIn, or is there email?
Yeah. You'll be able to, at the moment, if you book in the not too distant future, you'll be able to get me. So yeah, that's a direct link to my Calendly. But if it's in a few weeks or a few months, you might end up getting Kat, who's our director of client engagement inside of Multiply Me. And she's, again, smarter than I am and way more capable. So you're actually in better hands. And Lippy, my co-founder at Escala, may end up being him, who will jump on the discovery call with you. And I love to say he's like a business therapist. You come in, you tell him about all of your worldly problems, all the challenges that are happening, and he'll put together a proposal that will effectively look to solve all of those problems.
That's awesome. Sounds like what SWA does for our onboarding calls.
Some calls are 5 minutes, some calls are 2 hours. It is what it is. Everyone has different needs. Is there a certain size of e-commerce business that would benefit the most from Escala or Multiply Me?
Yeah, I would say that we're typically working with not the smaller sellers. So if you're, the reality is, like, it's a learning curve for both Multiply Me and probably more specifically Escala. You need to understand, you almost have to go, unless you're committed and the growth trajectory and you've built out that plan and you're ready. But typically speaking, you'll go through your VAs and you'll experience the fact that, okay, I've paid $5 an hour for this individual and they're handling a few tasks. And then you'll get to that next layer where you understand that you want to delegate to a professional and you start to build out more departments. So I would say, like, typically we're working with $1 million plus sellers. I mean, the largest sellers we're working with today are north of 75 million, and some aggregators as well. So, I would say 2 to 10 million is pretty much our sweet spot of the bulk of clients we're working with. But, we've worked with solopreneurs who are looking to build out their team for the first time, but are going in it with intent to bring on a professional for a specific function. So hopefully that answered the question.
Absolutely.
It did. And you're going to be putting out content, right? I'd love to follow that content. If we could get a link to it whenever it gets, released. I think education really is key. I mean, without that, you're not going to find the next generation of successful sellers that want to grow either. Let's just be realistic about it. That's why we're doing everything for supply chain also. So yeah, no, I'd love to get a link for that, and I'd love to have you back on. I'd love to get all the maybe the podcast is a wrong format, but maybe we could do something where you can actually show the screen and you can walk through everything. Tonight, I do appreciate you being so prepared and delivering so much content and education. Very much looking forward to continue to follow Multiply Me and Escala.
Well, we have to have you on again for those deep, dark secrets.
We do. Or we could take it off air.
You know what? We could take it off air, and then you guys can decide whether it's on air appropriate.
Everything's on air appropriate.
Yes, but
we'll have a chat about it.
Love
all right,
it.
perfect. Well, Yanni, thank you again so much for coming on the show, and we look forward to talking to everybody tomorrow.
Thanks
Bye,
for having me, guys.
Thank you.